Reacher Season 3 begins in Abbotsville, Maine, where Jack Reacher arrives in town and stops at a record store, hoping to sell a few old vinyl records for some quick cash. At first, everything seems peaceful. It is just another ordinary day for Reacher, who has grown used to traveling from place to place with barely anything to his name. But that quiet moment doesn't last long. While inside the shop, Reacher looks outside and suddenly notices chaos breaking out in the street. A beat-up Toyota pickup crashes directly into a black Audi. Inside the Audi are a university student named Richard Beck and his bodyguard, John Cooper. At first, the collision appears to be nothing more than a terrible accident. But Reacher quickly realizes there is something much more serious happening. The driver of the pickup is after Richard. The armed man pulls Richard from the Audi, and before anyone can react, he throws a grenade inside the vehicle. The explosion turns the car into a raging fireball, destroying any evidence that might have been left behind. Reacher immediately jumps into action. Unfortunately, he is badly outgunned. The attacker has an Uzi, while Reacher is carrying only a small revolver. The gunman opens fire, forcing Reacher to move quickly and use whatever advantage he can find. After a brutal struggle, Reacher manages to take the attacker down. He then turns his attention to Richard and tries to assure the terrified young man that he is there to save him. But everything is happening too quickly. In the confusion, Reacher fires at the wrong moment and accidentally kills a police officer. He doesn't even fully realize what has happened until it is already too late. Suddenly, Reacher's situation becomes far worse. He has managed to save Richard, but he is now a suspect in the shooting of a police officer. With no time to explain what really happened, Reacher gets Richard into the van and takes off before the authorities can surround them. Campus police quickly begin pursuing them, forcing Reacher to drive hard and find a way to lose the tail. Eventually, he manages to create enough distance to pull into a safer area. But there is another problem. The van is now too easy to identify, so Reacher needs a new vehicle. Behind a nearby property, he spots a parked car. He breaks into it and starts hot-wiring the vehicle, preparing to leave Richard behind and disappear on his own. Richard, terrified and desperate, begs him not to go. He tells Reacher that there is another option. If Reacher takes him home, Richard's father can help. His father, Zachary Beck, is wealthy, powerful, and extremely well-connected. Officially, Beck is a successful rug merchant, but Richard insists that his father has enough influence and resources to make Reacher disappear. Reacher considers the offer carefully. The police are searching for him. He has no allies, no money, and nowhere safe to hide. Richard's plan could easily turn into another trap, but it may also be Reacher's best chance to stay alive and get out of the situation. So Reacher agrees. He takes Richard to the Beck estate. When they arrive, they are stopped at the security gate by Polly Van Hovend, a former military man who looks like he was built for combat. Reacher is accustomed to being the biggest and most intimidating person in the room, but Polly is one of the few men who can make Reacher look relatively small. Polly takes Reacher's revolver and checks it. After discovering that the weapon is empty, he allows them onto the property. Inside the estate, Reacher meets Chapman Duke, the head of Beck's security team. Duke escorts him to Zachary Beck's office, where Reacher finally comes face to face with Richard's father. Beck wants to know exactly what happened. Reacher gives him the basic story. He explains that he is now in serious trouble and needs somewhere to stay until he can earn enough money to create a new identity and start over somewhere far away. Before leaving Beck's office, however, Reacher makes a calculated move. He deliberately leaves his fingerprints on a glass. Reacher knows Beck and his people will almost certainly investigate his identity. But that is exactly what he wants. It isn't carelessness. It's bait. Not long afterward, Beck calls Reacher back. This time, the meeting takes place inside the carriage house, where Duke and Polly are already waiting. Beck makes the situation very simple. Richter has two choices. He can work for Beck, or Beck can turn him over to the authorities. Beck explains that someone has been attacking his operation and that he needs additional muscle. After watching Richter handle himself during the chaos in town, Beck knows exactly what kind of man he is dealing with. But Beck doesn't trust people that easily. Before Richter can become part of the crew, he has to prove that he is willing to follow orders, even when those orders are dangerous or downright disturbing. Then Beck gives him his test. Russian roulette. Richter has no real way to refuse, so he plays along. He spins the cylinder, presses the gun against himself, and pulls the trigger. Nothing happens. But Richter doesn't stop. He spins the cylinder again and pulls the trigger once more. Then again. And again. Instead of showing fear, Richter keeps going, almost as if he is challenging everyone in the room to break before he does. Finally, Beck steps in and stops him. The message is unmistakable. Richter has just shown them that fear isn't something they can use against him. Richter doesn't scare easily, and that attitude earns him a place in Beck's operation. As Richter is being escorted away, however, he notices something unusual inside the carriage house. Something appears to be buried beneath the dirt. He doesn't show any reaction, but he quietly stores the detail in his memory. Duke then takes Richter to a room and locks him inside. It's clear that although Richter has technically been given a job, Beck's people still don't trust him. Once he's alone, Richter immediately starts searching the room. He checks every corner for hidden cameras, microphones, or anything else that could allow Beck's people to monitor him. After thoroughly searching the room and finding nothing, Richter pulls out a burner phone hidden inside the sole of his shoe. He makes a call to Susan Duffy and gives her an update. The story then jumps back several days to explain how Richter became involved in the entire situation in the first place. Earlier, Richter had been walking through town when he noticed a young purse snatcher keeping a suspicious eye on a woman's handbag. Richter realized what the kid was planning and stepped in before he could make his move. But instead of beating the young thief down, Richter gives him a warning. He even hands him $100 bill and tells him to use the opportunity to make a better choice. Then Richter sees someone he never expected to encounter again. Francis Xavier Quinn. The name immediately means something to Richter. Quinn isn't just another stranger from his past. He is connected to Richter's military history, and there is unfinished business between the two men. Richter tries to get closer, but Quinn quickly disappears into a vehicle with his driver before Richter can reach him. Determined to find out where Quinn went, Richter borrows a phone and contacts the newly formed 110th Special Investigations Unit. He reaches Officer Powell and asks him to run the license plate from Quinn's vehicle. Powell checks the plate, but the search doesn't produce anything useful. With no immediate lead, Richter gives Powell the address of his motel and tells him to contact him if anything comes up. Later that night, Richter is back in his motel room, keeping to himself, when federal agents suddenly show up at his door. Richter has no interest in listening to whatever they have to say. He immediately slips out through the back window, toothbrush in hand, ready to disappear as he normally does. But this time, there is a problem. Susan Duffy is already waiting for him. A moment later, two other agents, Elliot and Villanueva, catch up with them. Richter has no desire to become involved in another investigation, so he tries to walk away. That's when Duffy stops him with information that changes his mind. She knows about his call to Powell. Powell has apparently given Richter up, and Duffy now knows that Richter is searching for someone. Duffy explains what her team has been investigating. They are looking into a rug importing company called Bazaar, which they suspect is actually being used as a front for a major drug operation. A high-level Los Angeles drug dealer named Doreen Prow recently traveled to meet with the company's owner, Zachary Beck. The problem is that Beck has managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities. Duffy's team knows something is happening, but they still don't have a complete picture of his operation. Duffy suspects Richter may be investigating the same person, or at least someone connected to the case. But Richter isn't interested in helping simply because Duffy asks him to. Before revealing anything about his own investigation, he gives Duffy a task. He asks her to search hospital records around Linton, Virginia, for March 13th. Specifically, he wants information about an Asian American man in his 40s who suffered a small-caliber gunshot wound to the face and then fell from a height into the water. Duffy isn't exactly thrilled about being given homework, but she follows Richter's lead. Later, she contacts him and meets him at a diner to share what she discovered. There is a match. The man survived the fall and the gunshot wound. But there is one major problem. He has no memory of what happened to him. The man had been found alive after washing up on the shore, but he was badly injured and had no memory of how he got there. Duffy gives Richter everything she discovered, but now she wants answers of her own. Richter finally tells her the man's identity. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Francis Xavier Quinn, a former military intelligence officer. Quinn had once been accused of selling classified military secrets to enemy countries, which makes him far more dangerous than an ordinary criminal. Now Duffy starts putting the pieces together. If Quinn survived, and if he is somehow connected to Zachary Beck, then the rug importing business could be just one small part of a much larger operation. And if Richter and Duffy are both hunting the same enemy, working together may be their best chance of uncovering the truth and bringing the entire operation down. Richter agrees to take the driving job, but as soon as he gets the opportunity, he contacts Duffy and updates her on the situation. He tells her that Beck is sending him out with a truck and suggests they meet at a rest stop along the route. Their goal is simple: figure out exactly what Beck is having him transport. Whatever is hidden inside that truck could provide the first real clue about how Beck's operation works. While driving, Richter makes another call, this time to Neagley. Whenever Richter needs reliable information quickly, Neagley is one of the first people he turns to. He gives her 3 names, Polly, Duke, and Angel, and asks her to investigate their backgrounds. Neagley immediately wants to know what kind of trouble Richter has gotten himself into this time, but Richter refuses to explain. He tells her that he doesn't want anyone else getting involved in the case. That answer is enough for Neagley to understand that Richter has walked into something serious, even if he isn't telling her the whole story. Eventually, Richter reaches the designated rest stop, where Duffy is waiting with Villanueva and Dick Grunard, a New Haven police officer who specializes in training drug-sniffing dogs. They bring the dog around the truck, hoping it will detect something, drugs, a body, or anything else that might reveal what Beck is transporting. But the dog finds nothing. There is no reaction, no alert, and no indication that narcotics or a corpse is hidden inside the truck. Everyone is left frustrated. The truck obviously matters, but they still have no idea why. Richter then gets to work on the lock. He carefully tampers with it in a way that allows him to open and reseal it without leaving obvious evidence that someone has broken into the trailer. Meanwhile, Villanueva takes the GPS tracker to the next rest stop. If Beck's people are monitoring the truck, the tracker needs to continue moving along the expected route. Otherwise, someone could notice that something is wrong. Duffy climbs into the truck with Richter, and during their brief conversation, Richter explains what he has begun to suspect. Beck may not actually be the person in charge. He could simply be the public face of a much larger operation. And if that's true, Quinn may be the real mastermind behind everything. That possibility changes the entire situation. Richter eventually completes the delivery and follows Beck's instructions. He drops off the truck, takes an empty one in return, and heads back to the warehouse as if nothing unusual has happened. But when he walks inside, he finds Angel waiting there alone. Something immediately feels wrong. Angel has been tracking Richter's movements on a map, and when he calls Richter over, it's obvious that he has questions. He tells Reacher they need to talk before Duke arrives to take him back to the house. Then Angel reveals what he has discovered. He searched the minivan Reacher claimed to have hotwired earlier. But there was a problem. The steering column didn't show the kind of damage that should have been left behind after someone hotwired the vehicle. There were no fresh scratches, and the floor mats contained none of the pieces of wire insulation that would normally be left behind after stripping the cables. In other words, Reacher's story doesn't add up. Reacher remains completely calm. Without hesitation, he tells Angel that he cleaned up the evidence and threw the pieces away. Angel finds the explanation strange, almost amusing. But he doesn't believe it. And Reacher realizes something important. Angel isn't simply suspicious anymore. He's getting close to discovering the truth. Reacher knows he needs to get out before Angel can put everything together. But before he can make his move, Duke pulls up outside to take him back to the Beck estate. Reacher starts toward the exit. Then Angel decides to stop pretending. He openly accuses Reacher of being dirty. And then he takes it one step further. Angel says he believes Reacher is working with law enforcement. Angel is about to take his suspicions to Duke, and Reacher knows he cannot let that happen. In one brutal, decisive move, Reacher grabs Angel and slams his head onto a metal pin, killing him instantly. There is no long fight, no warning, and no chance for Angel to call for help. One moment, Angel is a threat to Reacher's cover. The next, he is dead. Reacher quickly drags the body out of sight and hides it beneath the desk. The cleanup is far from perfect, but Reacher doesn't have much time. Outside, Duke becomes impatient and starts honking the horn. Eventually, he decides to come inside and check what is taking so long. Reacher manages to step outside just before Duke reaches the room, acting as though nothing happened. He tells Duke that the delay was Angel's fault because he wouldn't stop talking. During the drive back to the Beck estate, Duke asks what Angel had been talking about. Reacher keeps his answer vague, making it sound like Angel was simply complaining about the job. He gives Duke nothing useful to investigate. Back at the house, Reacher ends up in the kitchen, where he starts a brief conversation with Annette, one of the maids. From her, Reacher learns that she was born in Le Havre and came to Maine for school. Working for Beck is simply how she pays her way through college. It's a small detail, but Reacher pays attention to people. He especially notices those who work for powerful men and may know more than they are willing to say. Not long afterward, Duke returns with another message. Beck wants to see Reacher. Apparently, Angel left a voicemail before his death, and Beck now has questions. Inside Beck's office, the atmosphere is noticeably different. The conversation is more serious, and Beck gets straight to the point. He explains that Angel had identified the pickup truck used in Richard's kidnapping. The vehicle belonged to a group Beck's organization had dealt with before. However, according to Beck, none of those men matches the description of the kidnapper Reacher encountered. Reacher offers a possible explanation. Maybe the group has become more aggressive. Maybe they are expanding their operation and used Richard's kidnapping as a warning, a way to send Beck a message. But Beck isn't convinced. If these people were really trying to make a move against him, why would they disappear afterward? Why would they suddenly go silent? Reacher suggests that they could simply be waiting for the right opportunity to strike again. While they talk, Reacher tries to extract as much information from Beck as possible. He wants to know who Beck is afraid of, who he answers to, and where Quinn might fit into the entire operation. But Beck doesn't give him much. He keeps his cards close to his chest. Later, Reacher contacts Neagley again. This time, she has something useful. Polly and Angel both have military backgrounds, and both were discharged because of violent misconduct and harassment. Duke also has a law enforcement background. He used to be a police officer, but his record is far from clean, with criminal activity attached to his past. Neagley offers to come and help. That's what she does whenever Richters gets himself into trouble. But the moment she realizes Quinn is involved, Richters shuts the idea down. He tells her this isn't her fight. Quinn isn't an ordinary enemy, and Richters refuses to let Neagley put herself in the middle of it. There is no argument. Richters ends the call before she can push the issue any further. He then contacts Duffy and gives her a new assignment. He needs a car and a change of clothes dropped off about a mile from Beck's property. Richters has to get back to the warehouse before Angel's body is discovered. If Beck's people find the corpse, his entire cover could collapse. A few hours later, Richters quietly slips away from the property. To avoid being seen, he strips down to his underwear and swims across the water in the darkness, making his way toward the meeting point where Duffy is waiting. By the time he reaches her, the situation is becoming more dangerous, and every mistake could destroy their investigation. Inside the car, Richters explains everything that happened with Beck and Angel. He tells Duffy that they need to convince Beck that the fake kidnappers are no longer a threat. If Beck continues investigating the kidnapping, he could eventually uncover the truth and realize that the entire situation was staged. Richters also repeats his growing suspicion. Quinn may be much more deeply involved than they originally thought. Beck is dangerous, but Quinn could be the real force behind the violence, operating from the shadows while Beck takes the blame. Duffy, however, remains focused on Teresa. She still believes Teresa could be somewhere inside the warehouse, possibly being held there and waiting for someone to rescue her. Duffy insists that they search the building while they have the chance. Richters doesn't argue. Instead, in a rare moment of honesty, he explains why Quinn matters so much to him. He tells Duffy about Dominique Cole, a subordinate under his command who was killed by Quinn. Richters doesn't give an emotional speech or try to explain what he is feeling. He doesn't need to. The name alone is enough for Duffy to understand that this is personal. Together, Richters and Duffy head to the warehouse. Once inside, they find Angel's body exactly where Richters left it. His laptop is there too. Duffy takes the laptop, knowing it could contain valuable information, tracking data, messages, records, or anything else that might reveal how Beck's operation is structured. But before dealing with the body, they focus on Teresa. They search the entire warehouse from top to bottom. They open boxes, inspect containers, check crates, and search every possible hiding place where Teresa could have been held. They move quickly, but there is an increasing sense of dread. Every empty room makes the possibility of finding Teresa seem less likely. Yet there is no sign of her. No Teresa. No evidence that she was ever kept there. After exhausting every possible hiding place, Richters changes his focus. If they can't find Teresa, they at least need to make the most of the time they have. Because Angel's body is now their biggest problem. If Beck's people discover the corpse, Richters' cover is over. Richters quickly comes up with a new plan. They need to get rid of Angel's body before anyone from Beck's crew discovers it. Richters hides Angel inside one of the containers, and then he and Duffy get to work cleaning the warehouse. There is no time to hesitate and no room for mistakes. They scrub away the blood, wipe down every surface, and remove anything that could reveal what happened. But their cleanup is interrupted when the two men who exchanged trucks with Richters suddenly return to the warehouse. They have brought the truck back, creating another problem that Richters and Duffy have to deal with immediately. They can't use their guns. A gunfight would create too much noise and raise too many questions. So they handle the situation quietly. Richters and Duffy ambush the two men and take them down in a fast, brutal fight. Once the confrontation is over, the situation has become even worse. Angel is no longer the only body they have to hide. Richters and Duffy return to cleaning the warehouse. They wipe away the blood, remove any evidence of the fight, and hide the two new bodies along with Angel. It's ugly work, but there is no other option. If even one piece of evidence is left behind, Reacher's cover could be destroyed. Once the cleanup is finally complete, Duffy drives Reacher back to the drop-off point. Before leaving, Reacher takes Angel's gun, seals it inside a bag, and then makes his way back toward Beck's property. Once again, he swims through the water under the cover of darkness, slipping back onto the estate as though nothing happened. By the following morning, Beck is already on edge. A major shipment is expected to arrive, and everyone is supposed to be ready. The problem is that the two men who were supposed to help receive the shipment are now missing, thanks to Reacher and Duffy. Still, Beck doesn't bring Reacher into the real operation. Instead, he gives him a much simpler assignment. Reacher is told to take Richard into town to do some shopping. It sounds like an insignificant task, but Reacher knows that even the smallest assignment can provide useful information. During the drive, Reacher carefully questions Richard without making it obvious that he's investigating him. Eventually, Richard lets one important name slip. Julius McCabe. According to Richard, McCabe is actually the man above Beck, the person really running the operation. But after revealing that much, Richard immediately shuts down again. He refuses to explain anything else about the business. They eventually stop at a toy store, where Richard picks out a Roy Rogers cap gun as a birthday present for his father. Beck is turning 50, and Richard mentions that the birthday party is going to be a major event, with plenty of guests expected at the estate. While Richard is distracted inside the store, Reacher slips into the restroom and calls Duffy. He tells her what he has learned. A major shipment is coming in, but Reacher is still being kept away from the most important information. The lower-level employees only know fragments of the operation, while the real secrets are protected by the people at the top. If Reacher wants to uncover the truth, he needs to move higher within Beck's organization. He needs to become Beck's new second-in-command. Reacher also gives Duffy another assignment. He wants her to use Angel's email account to send Beck false information. The message should claim that the kidnapper's last known location is an abandoned DA safe house hidden somewhere in the woods. If Beck believes the story and takes the bait, Reacher can use the situation to eliminate another obstacle while strengthening Beck's trust in him. With the plan underway, Duffy and Villanueva begin tracking the incoming shipment. Meanwhile, back in town, Richard runs into a group of university students who start bullying him. They clearly think Richard is an easy target. Unfortunately for them, they have no idea who is standing beside him. Reacher steps in and shuts the situation down immediately, making sure the students regret choosing that particular moment to act tough. Afterward, Richard becomes more comfortable around Reacher. He even buys him some ice cream, and the small gesture helps break down some of the distance between them. Richard finally starts opening up. He admits that McCabe isn't simply connected to the business. McCabe is the man controlling it. According to Richard, McCabe took control of Beck's operation and now has power over almost every part of their lives. Even Cooper, the bodyguard assigned to stay close to Richard, was there for more than protection. His real job was to keep Richard under constant watch. Richard also reveals that his earlier kidnapping wasn't random. Polly carried it out on McCabe's orders. Richard explains that Beck had discovered a way to move shipments through customs and past the dock managers without attracting attention. When McCabe learned about the system, he forced his way into the operation. He saw Beck's rug business as the perfect cover and began using it to smuggle his own products. So while Beck may still appear to be the man in charge, the reality is very different. McCabe is the one pulling the strings. This revelation changes the way Reacher sees Richard. Richard has finally trusted him with something important, and Reacher realizes that the young man isn't simply spoiled or frightened. He's trapped. Meanwhile, near the warehouse, Duffy and Villanueva watch as the latest shipment is prepared. They photograph as much as they can, hoping to gather evidence about what Beck's organization is moving. Something about this shipment immediately stands out. It's roughly twice the size of the previous deliveries, yet there is even less information available about it. That usually means someone powerful is making sure the details stay hidden. During their surveillance, Duffy and Villanueva also photograph a man who appears to have considerable authority within the operation. Duffy suspects the man could be McCabe, but they still don't have enough evidence to confirm his identity. Back at the lodge, Elliot steps away to take a call from Duffy. Cooper sees an opportunity and tries to manipulate the situation. He deliberately injures himself with his chair, hoping Elliot will feel sympathy for him, lower his guard, or possibly give him an opening to escape. But Elliot doesn't fall for the act. Cooper remains exactly where he is. Meanwhile, Reacher and Richard return to Beck's estate just as Beck and Duke are preparing to leave. The fake email sent from Angel's account has worked perfectly. Beck believes they have finally found a lead on the people responsible for Richard's kidnapping, and he's ready to pursue it. What Beck doesn't realize is that he's heading directly into a trap created by Reacher and Duffy. Before leaving, Reacher asks for a quick bathroom break. But instead of going to the bathroom, he slips around to the back of the property and retrieves Angel's gun from the trash bag where he had hidden it. Once the weapon is secured, Reacher returns to the group, gets into the vehicle, and joins them on the drive toward the woods. They eventually reach the abandoned DA safe house. Reacher and Duke take weapons from the trunk and approach the building. Reacher then makes up a story, claiming that he can see 6 men inside. He wants Duke to believe that the kidnappers are waiting for them. They prepare to storm the building. But the moment they enter, Reacher turns his weapon on Duke. He demands to know where Teresa is being held. Duke refuses to cooperate. Whether he believes he can bluff his way out of the situation or is simply too loyal to Beck's organization, he doesn't give Reacher the information he wants. Reacher doesn't waste time arguing. When Duke remains silent, Reacher kills him. Now Reacher has another problem. He needs to make the scene look like exactly what Beck expects, a violent confrontation with the kidnappers. He takes Duke's rifle and stages the aftermath of a firefight. Then he sets the building up to explode. He opens the gas line on the oven, places flammable containers inside the microwave, and sets the timer, creating a crude but effective explosive trap. Before leaving, Reacher deliberately roughs himself up, making it look as though he barely survived the attack. Then he runs. Seconds later, the safe house explodes behind him. When Reacher returns to Beck, he delivers his story with complete confidence. He claims the operation went wrong because the kidnappers were heavily armed and ready for them. Duke was killed during the confrontation. Then Reacher gives Beck Angel's gun. He uses it as evidence that Angel must have betrayed them and was secretly working with the kidnappers. With Angel already missing, Duke dead, and the 2 truck drivers also gone, Beck has very little reason to question Reacher's version of events. And that's exactly what Reacher wanted. Beck believes him. The deception works so well that Reacher is promoted almost immediately. With Duke dead and Angel supposedly exposed as a traitor, Beck makes Reacher his new second-in-command. Soon afterward, Beck contacts McCabe and explains what happened. He reports Angel's betrayal, Duke's death, and the failed attempt to deal with the kidnappers. McCabe listens, completely unaware that Reacher is standing right beside Beck and manipulating the entire situation from within. After the call, Beck tells Reacher that his boss has made a decision. And Reacher is about to find out exactly what that decision means. Reacher is now officially Beck's new lieutenant. Just like that, he has gone from being a suspicious outsider to one of the most trusted men inside the organization. Afterward, Reacher drops Beck off and casually says he's going to get some lunch. But lunch is the last thing on his mind. Instead, he drives straight to the lodge where Duffy and the others are staying. Once he arrives, Richter tells Duffy what happened at the abandoned DA safe house. He explains that he had no choice but to destroy the building, but the important thing is that the plan worked. Beck trusts him now. Duke is dead. And Richter has finally reached the position he needed to get closer to the truth. Then Richter gives Duffy an even bigger revelation. Beck has confirmed that McCabe is the man behind the entire operation. But when Duffy shows Richter the photograph of McCabe, Richter immediately recognizes the face. It isn't McCabe. It's Francis Xavier Quinn, the same man Richter believed he killed years earlier. Duffy is furious when she realizes Richter has been keeping the full story from her. She wants to know exactly what Quinn did to make this investigation so personal for Richter. At first, Richter remains as cold and unreadable as ever. But eventually, he opens up. He tells Duffy what happened 12 years earlier. Back then, Richter was working on a slow and frustrating military investigation involving a weapons specialist named Roland Goravsky. Goravsky was suspected of selling classified weapons blueprints, information that could cause serious damage if it reached an enemy government. Sergeant Dominique Cole was assigned to assist Richter with the investigation. Cole was intelligent, disciplined, and extremely dedicated. She wasn't simply there to follow Richter's orders. She was actively working the case alongside him. In fact, Cole was the one who discovered that the exchange of classified documents was taking place at a park. Goravsky attempted to outsmart them during the meeting, but Richter and Cole managed to capture him. Once they interrogated Goravsky, the case took an even darker turn. Goravsky confessed that he wasn't selling the information willingly. Quinn had been blackmailing him. He was forcing Goravsky to leak the weapons blueprints by holding his 4-year-old daughter hostage. Another investigator, Private Tony Froson, also helped move the case forward by obtaining Quinn's phone records and bringing them to Cole. Those records revealed a connection between Quinn and a Syrian national named Sonya Cassidy, who had military connections of his own. Richter suspected Cassidy was the buyer, the person receiving the classified information Quinn was selling. Eventually, Richter, Cole, and Froson arrested Cassidy, bringing the investigation dangerously close to its conclusion. But something continued to bother Richter. Everyone seemed to assume that he had done most of the work while Cole had simply followed along. Richter knew that wasn't true. Cole had earned her place in the investigation. She had found crucial evidence, connected the pieces, and helped bring the case together. So Richter made a decision. He wanted Cole to receive the recognition she deserved. Cassidy eventually broke and helped the military recover the classified documents from Quinn. Richter and Cole confirmed that the documents were genuine, and with all the evidence they had collected, Quinn's escape routes appeared to be completely closed. The case seemed finished. That's when Richter made a decision that would haunt him for years. He wanted Cole to be the one who arrested Quinn. She had earned that moment, and Richter wanted her to receive the credit. So Cole took Froson with her and went to Quinn's house to make the arrest. But then time began to pass. Cole didn't report back. At first, Richter simply waited. Then his concern turned into something much darker. He sent Cole a text message, hoping for a simple update. Instead, the response he received immediately told him that something was very wrong. From the very first day they worked together, Richter had told Cole not to call him sir. She knew that. So when the message she sent ended with that exact word, Richter immediately realized something was wrong. Either Cole hadn't written the message herself, or someone had forced her to send it. Richter and the military police rushed to Quinn's house. But when they arrived, they found only Froson's body. Cole was gone. Quinn had taken her somewhere else. Richter knew exactly what that probably meant. Quinn was likely torturing Cole for information. And Quinn wasn't simply corrupt. He was sadistic, unstable, and capable of extreme cruelty without hesitation. Richter began piecing together the available clues and concluded that Quinn had probably taken Cole to his weekend property in Linton. He headed there while the military worked to confirm the exact location. Once they identified the property, Richter arrived ready to finish the case. But when he entered a barn on the property, he discovered a nightmare. Dominique Cole was dead. Her body showed clear evidence of the horrific treatment she had suffered at Quinn's hands. For Richter, it was devastating. He was furious, but underneath that anger was grief. Cole had trusted him. He had trusted her enough to give her the arrest. And now she was dead partly because Richter had wanted her to receive the recognition she deserved. From that moment on, the case stopped being about justice. It became personal. It became revenge. Richter eventually found Quinn and dragged him to the edge of a cliff overlooking a violent river. Then Richter used Quinn's own small-caliber pistol and shot him in the face. The bullet should have killed him. Richter watched Quinn fall into the water and believed the man was dead. But the bullet had missed Quinn's brain. Somehow, he survived. And 12 years later, Quinn is back at the center of everything, operating under the name Julius McCabe. After Richter finishes telling Duffy the story, she reveals something of her own. She admits that she never actually paid Teresa to go undercover. Instead, she frightened Teresa by making her believe she could face prison time. Teresa believed the threat and agreed to go undercover. Now Duffy carries that guilt heavily. Teresa entered a dangerous situation because Duffy pushed her into it, and Duffy feels responsible for bringing her home alive. Meanwhile, Richter returns to Beck's estate and continues gathering information wherever he can. He asks Agnes and Annette about the people expected to attend Beck's birthday party. Their answers tell him something important. Beck doesn't seem to have many genuine friends, and he apparently dislikes spending time with people from his business. Agnes even describes him as lonely. The upcoming birthday celebration isn't really a gathering of close friends and family. It's more like another business event disguised as a party. The following morning, Richter sees Richard practicing boxing and decides to work with him. Part of it is training. Part of it is simply building trust. Richard is frightened and trapped in a world he doesn't understand, but Richter can see that the kid still has some fight left in him. Meanwhile, Duffy and Villanueva continue their search. They travel between warehouses connected to Bazaar Bazaar, checking each location for any evidence that Teresa might have been moved. Eventually, their investigation leads them to a tubing facility. Then Richter receives a troubling call from Beck. Angel's laptop contains a tracking application. And according to the tracker, the laptop was last seen at a facility, the exact same facility where Duffy and Villanueva are currently searching. Beck reacts immediately. The moment he discovers the laptop's location, he sends 3 men to the facility with orders to kill whoever has it. And to make sure the job is completed, Beck sends Richter along with them. Richter immediately realizes how serious the situation is. He gets behind the wheel and races toward the tubing facility, repeatedly trying to reach Duffy before Beck's men arrive. But Duffy doesn't answer. She and Villanueva are already inside the warehouse, completely unaware that 3 armed men are closing in on them. The attackers reach the facility before Richter does and begin moving through the building. Still racing toward the location, Richter calls Elliot and explains what is happening. Since Duffy isn't answering her phone, Elliot quickly comes up with another idea. He calls the company's phone inside the facility, hoping someone will hear it and realize that something is wrong. Inside the warehouse, Harley and the 2 other attackers spot Duffy and Villanueva. At that exact moment, the phone starts ringing. Duffy finds it strange because the facility is supposed to be closed. Still, she answers. Elliot is on the other end, and he immediately warns her that Quinn has sent men after them. The attackers are already inside the building. Within seconds, the warehouse erupts into a gunfight. Duffy and Villanueva are forced to fight their way through the ambush. Moments later, Richter arrives and joins the battle. He takes down one of the attackers, while Duffy manages to kill another. But during the chaos, Duffy accidentally drops her badge. If the wrong person finds it, their entire operation could be exposed. Richter reaches Duffy and quietly tells her to get out through the south exit. They can't kill Harley as well. If Richter ends up being the only survivor, it would look far too suspicious. Duffy and Villanueva need to disappear while Richter keeps the scene believable. As they escape, Richter spots Duffy's badge on the floor and picks it up. Outside, Duffy and Villanueva split up and drive away. They also get rid of the laptop by throwing it out, making sure it can't be traced back to them. Richter, meanwhile, loads Harley into the Audi. But instead of simply driving away, he deliberately gets the vehicle stuck in the mud. It looks like an accident, but Richter is actually buying Duffy and Villanueva enough time to escape. Eventually, Richter and Harley return to Beck's property, where they dispose of the bodies from the warehouse by dumping them into the ocean. The current is strong, and the undertow quickly pulls the bodies away, taking the evidence with it. Later, Richter contacts Duffy. She explains that she and Villanueva have separated so they can investigate the addresses found on the laptop more quickly. Richter tells her that he recovered her badge and will return it the next time they meet. He also warns her that Quinn is becoming aware that federal agents are closing in on his operation. The enemy is getting suspicious. Back at the Beck estate, Richter takes a moment to enjoy some incredibly expensive coffee, made from beans that have passed through the digestive system of a civet. It sounds disgusting, but apparently wealthy people will pay a fortune for almost anything with a strange enough story behind it. Meanwhile, Quinn has sent 2 additional men to help guard the property. One of them starts making Annette uncomfortable. Richter notices what is happening and quietly steps in to protect her without creating a scene. Later, Richter returns to his room and hides Duffy's badge inside his pillowcase. A short time later, Annette visits him carrying a piece of cake and a note that reads, "Merc cute." For a brief moment, there is something almost innocent about the interaction, a small, sweet moment in the middle of an increasingly dangerous situation. But back at the lodge, Elliot makes a serious mistake. Cooper, who is still being held there, asks for a cigarette. Elliot allows him to have one, believing he still has complete control over the situation. But Cooper is waiting for an opportunity. As Elliot leans closer to light the cigarette, Cooper secretly takes a mouthful of alcohol from the table. Then, when Elliot gets close enough, Cooper spits the alcohol directly into the flame. The resulting burst of fire hits Elliot in the face and blinds him. Elliot is left in terrible pain and unable to defend himself properly. Cooper attacks him, overpowers him, and kills him. Then he escapes the lodge, steals the vehicle, and drives away. When Duffy returns, she immediately knows something is wrong. The car is gone. The door is open. And the entire place feels wrong. She goes inside and discovers Elliot's body on the floor. Duffy immediately calls Richter and tells him what happened. Cooper killed Elliot, and there is a strong possibility that he is heading straight to Beck's mansion to expose Richter. If Cooper reaches Beck and tells him the truth, Richter's cover is finished. Everything they have sacrificed to get this far could collapse in an instant. Richter quickly comes up with a plan. He needs to protect his cover, stop Cooper, and make sure Elliot's death wasn't meaningless. He calls Villanueva and tells him to follow his instructions exactly. There is no room for improvisation anymore. Meanwhile, Duffy heads toward the power transformer and shoots it, knocking it out and cutting electricity to Beck's estate. The blackout gives Richter a believable reason to leave. He tells Beck that the outage could be connected to Angel's people and suggests that someone might be using the darkness as cover to approach the property. Richter says he is going to check the road leading to the estate. Then he leaves to meet Villanueva. But inside the mansion, Quinn is already becoming suspicious. He orders Beck to have the entire staff searched. And that creates a serious problem for Richter. Duffy's federal badge is still hidden inside his room. Out on the road, Richter and Villanueva set their trap. They flip Villanueva's car onto its side, making it look like a serious accident. Richter is counting on one thing. If Cooper drives past and sees an older man trapped inside an overturned vehicle, he will stop to check. Maybe instinct will make him stop. Maybe curiosity. Maybe he will think the situation gives him an opportunity. Whatever the reason, Richter knows Cooper is likely to get out of his car. Back at the Beck estate, Richter's cover comes dangerously close to being exposed when Harley enters his room to search it. The timing couldn't be worse. Duffy's badge is still hidden inside the pillowcase. If Harley lifts that pillow, Richter's entire operation could be exposed. Meanwhile, Cooper arrives at the scene of the staged accident. Just as Richter predicted, he stops and gets out of his vehicle to check whether the old man inside the overturned car is still alive. That's the opening Richter has been waiting for. He shoots Cooper in the head, killing him before he can warn anyone. Richter then turns the vehicle back over and heads toward Beck's estate. At the same time, Duffy contacts the DA and informs Elliot's father that his son has been killed. When Richter returns to the mansion, he notices that everyone has been gathered inside Beck's office. The atmosphere is tense. Richter immediately becomes concerned when Beck announces that there is an imposter among them. According to Beck, someone inside the house has been working with federal agents and secretly feeding them information about the operation. For a moment, Richter believes they have finally discovered the truth. But then Beck reveals the identity of the supposed traitor. It's Annette. Polly has already killed her. Now Richter is ordered to dispose of her body by dumping it into the ocean. Before Richter can leave, Polly reminds him exactly who has the physical advantage by striking him across the face. Richter takes the hit. Right now, allowing his pride to expose his cover would be a foolish mistake. But Annette's death affects him differently. She wasn't simply another innocent person caught in the middle. She had been working undercover. After disposing of the body, Richter contacts Duffy and tells her what happened. The maid was actually an ATF agent. And now she is dead. But her death also helps Richter make an important final connection. He tells Duffy that he has finally figured out what Quinn's organization is really transporting. It's not drugs. It's guns. And not ordinary street weapons either. They are expensive, high-quality firearms that are difficult to trace. Richter begins laying out the pieces. Beck had hired a mechanic. There was also an undercover firearms tester involved. One of the locations discovered through Angel's laptop was connected to a lubricant company, which suddenly makes sense. The weapons needed to be cleaned, tested, and maintained before being delivered to buyers. They already knew Quinn had a major sale coming. Now they finally know what he is selling. The next morning, Beck arrives at Richter's room with new instructions. He tells Richter that the two of them have been summoned to the warehouse. And this meeting is strictly between them. That detail immediately tells Richter that something important is happening. Before leaving with Beck, Richter slips into the bathroom and calls Duffy. He gives her an update. Quinn is the one who called them in. Duffy warns Richter not to do anything reckless. She wants him to keep his phone on so they can listen to the conversation and collect as much evidence as possible. But for Richter, this meeting is about more than surveillance. After 12 years, he is finally going to stand face to face with Quinn again. And now he is going to find out whether Quinn's memory loss is genuine, or just another lie. Richter and Beck arrive at the warehouse while Duffy and Villanueva quietly position themselves outside. Inside, Richter sees the operation for himself. Crates of firearms are being inspected, tested, and prepared for shipment. There is no longer any doubt. Quinn's weapons operation is real. Beck turns to Richter and asks if he's ready to meet the boss. Richter tells him that he's been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Then he reaches for the gun hidden at his waistband. Finally, Richter comes face to face with Francis Xavier Quinn. And immediately, one thing becomes clear. Quinn genuinely doesn't remember Richter. The amnesia is real. He has no idea that the man standing in front of him is the same person who shot him 12 years earlier and left him for dead in a river. Quinn is furious with Beck over the recent failures and tears into him for the mistakes that have nearly damaged the operation. But he doesn't kill Beck. Beck still has an important role to play because the buyers expect him to be present when the transaction takes place. For now, Beck stays alive. Quinn continues criticizing him, but he also seems impressed by Richter. From Quinn's perspective, Richter has saved the operation several times, making him far more valuable than the average employee. Then Richter notices something being carried into the warehouse. It's a dress. Quinn casually explains that it is for Teresa. That gives Richter and the others two important pieces of information at once. The good news is that Teresa is still alive. The bad news is much worse. Quinn plans to use Teresa as part of the deal, essentially offering her to the buyers as an added incentive after all the delays. To Quinn, Teresa isn't a human being. She's leverage. Meanwhile, outside the warehouse, Tereyov and his men arrive. Harley carries a bag of cash out to Tereyov's vehicle. Tereyov is the man Quinn borrowed money from, and now Quinn is under serious pressure. Not only has he been slow to repay the debt, but the weapons deal is also running behind schedule. Tereyov isn't simply an angry investor. He's a powerful Russian mob figure, someone even Quinn has to treat carefully. That alone says a lot, because Quinn isn't the kind of man who is easily intimidated. Eventually, Tereyov leaves. Quinn then gives his men new orders. He wants them to find out who has been investigating his operation and eliminate them. Quinn is no longer simply reacting to problems. Now he's hunting the people responsible. Meanwhile, Duffy and Villanueva follow the clue from the dress and visit the shop where it was ordered. They manage to obtain the phone number of the person who placed the order. But when they try calling it, nobody answers. It's another lead, but they still don't have enough information to know where it will take them. Back at Beck's estate, Richter contacts Duffy and tells her he'll be in town for about an hour. Then he approaches Richard and brings up the cap gun he bought for Beck's birthday. Richter points out that if Richard went to the trouble of buying the gift, he should at least get some glue to repair the crack caused by the university bullies earlier. Richard heads off to buy the glue, giving Richter an opportunity to slip away and meet Duffy in an alley. There, Richter returns Duffy's badge, removing one more dangerous piece of evidence from his room. Duffy tells him that Villanueva has a contact who works with a service provider, and that person may be able to obtain the call records associated with the number from the dress order. They're getting closer, but the progress is slow. And Quinn is becoming increasingly alert. Before they part ways, Duffy thanks Richter for not killing Quinn when he had the opportunity. She understands how personal this is for him. She knows how difficult it must have been for Richter to stand face to face with the man responsible for Dominique Cole's death and not pull the trigger. Then something unexpected happens. Without really thinking about it, Duffy suddenly grabs Richter and kisses him. Almost immediately, she seems annoyed with herself, as though her emotions briefly took control before her judgment could catch up. Richter doesn't make the moment awkward. But they don't have much time to process it. Villanueva arrives. Richter immediately tells him to stay back. There's a serious problem. Villanueva was the fake police officer involved in Richters' staged kidnapping story. If Richard sees him, their entire cover could collapse. And that's exactly what happens. Richard recognizes Villanueva. The secret is out. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Rock Creek, Virginia, Quinn's men are already moving against people connected to the investigation. The hunt has begun. Quinn's men track down Powell, the officer from the 110th who had run Quinn's license plate for Richters. They torture and interrogate Powell, trying to find out how much he knows and whether anyone else is involved. At the same time, Quinn sends 2 assassins to Chicago to kill Neagley in her office. That plan goes about as badly as anyone familiar with Neagley would expect. She fights back and takes down both attackers. One of them survives long enough to start begging her to call an ambulance as he slowly loses blood. Neagley remains completely calm. Before offering him any help, she asks who sent them. Eventually, he gives her a name. Costello. That's the man who arranged the hit. Neagley then calls Richters and tells him that someone sent 2 men to kill her, but she managed to handle them. Richters immediately understands what this means. Quinn has started eliminating everyone connected to the investigation. Anyone associated with Richters, Duffy, or the 110th could now be a target. Richters ends the call quickly because another thought occurs to him. Powell could be in danger too. As for the wounded assassin still begging for medical help, Neagley coldly tells him, "You're an ambulance," and leaves him to die. Richters immediately contacts the 110th and orders them to send 3 armed officers to Powell's house to protect him. But it's already too late. Back at Beck's mansion, Quinn's vehicle suddenly speeds into the driveway. Beck immediately becomes nervous. Quinn has discovered something serious. Powell, an officer from the 110th, had flagged his license plate. At the same time, a former member of the 110th has been investigating the people Quinn hired for his operation. Beck realizes what that means. Richters used to be part of the 110th. The truth finally clicks into place. Quinn orders Polly to kill Richters. But Richters is already moving. He grabs a plow truck and tears away from Beck's property as fast as he can. He doesn't get far. Quinn's men open fire, shredding the truck with bullets. The vehicle takes too much damage to keep moving, forcing Richters to abandon it. He calls Duffy and tells her that his cover has been completely exposed. He gives her the road below Beck's property as their meeting point. But Quinn isn't giving Richters any time to escape. He sends his men after him on quad bikes. Richters ends the call, disappears into the woods, and starts moving through the trees. The men pursuing him believe they have the advantage. They don't. This is exactly the kind of terrain where Richters becomes even more dangerous. One by one, he takes Quinn's men down in the forest, using the darkness and terrain to his advantage. When it's over, every attacker is dead. And Richters is gone. He eventually makes his way to a laundromat, where he pays an elderly couple to let him hide for the night. It's not comfortable, but Richters isn't looking for comfort. He's looking for somewhere he can stay alive and remain invisible. Later, Polly reaches the woods and discovers the aftermath. Every man Quinn sent after Richters is dead. But Richters himself has disappeared. Polly returns to the Beck estate and tells Quinn that Richters escaped. Quinn takes the news badly. Furious and humiliated, he decides to punish Beck by going after Richters. He forces Richters to play Russian roulette in front of his own father. Richters survives. But Quinn still wants Beck to understand the price of failure. He cuts off Beck's ear. Meanwhile, Richters reunites with Duffy and Villanueva. Duffy believes it may be time to bring in the ATF and launch a direct raid on Quinn's operation. Richter immediately rejects the idea. Quinn knows that his secret is exposed now. That means he'll already be changing his procedures, moving evidence, and protecting the weak points in his operation. A raid based on old intelligence could easily result in them storming empty buildings. Then Villanueva brings them another important lead. The calls made to the dress shop came from a place called Port Rome. That could be where Teresa is being held. But there's only one way to find out. Richter studies the information and develops a theory. He believes Teresa may be being held on a boat in Port Rome. Then he recognizes the phone number. It belongs to Harley. The three of them head toward the docks and begin searching the boats. Eventually, Richter spots a small vessel anchored away from the main group. Something about it immediately catches his attention. Richter and Duffy swim out to the boat and climb aboard. Inside, they discover signs that someone had been tied up there. The marks and other traces strongly suggest that Teresa was held on the vessel. Then Harley arrives in a speedboat. Richter and Duffy move quickly and catch him before he can take control of the situation. During the struggle, the boat catches fire. Harley finally admits the truth. Quinn was paying him to keep Teresa captive. But once Quinn realized the operation had been compromised, he wanted Teresa moved somewhere closer so he could keep her under his own watch. Harley doesn't know exactly where Quinn took her. With no more useful information to give them, Harley is left behind on the burning boat. Richter and Duffy take the speedboat and race back toward shore. Once they reach land, Duffy is frustrated. Their latest lead has failed to reveal Teresa's location. But Richter tells her they still have someone inside Quinn's organization who could help them. There's only one problem. That person doesn't know he's helping them yet. Richter tells Duffy to get ready. They're heading to Los Angeles. Before they leave, Richter and Duffy stop in Boston to visit Teresa's grandmother. The elderly woman is still sharp, lively, and full of energy. But beneath that strength is a deep concern for her missing granddaughter. The visit affects Duffy. Teresa is no longer just an undercover informant. She's a granddaughter with a family desperately waiting for her to come home. Meanwhile, in Illinois, Neagley tracks down Costello and forces him to reveal what he knows. Costello admits that he worked as Quinn's fixer. But he also reveals something far darker. This isn't the first time Quinn has destroyed innocent people to protect his criminal empire. 5 years earlier, in Chicago, Quinn took control of a family-run export company. At first, the family tries to survive under Quinn's control. But eventually, they reach their limit and threaten to report him to the authorities. Quinn responds in the most horrifying way imaginable. He murders the entire family, including the children. The more Richter and the others learn about Quinn, the clearer his methods become. He doesn't simply eliminate problems. He erases them completely. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Duffy and Richter review footage connected to Doreen Prow's illegal activities. While watching the recordings, Richter notices a small detail that could give them leverage over Doreen. And they waste no time using it. During this period, the tension between Richter and Duffy finally reaches a breaking point. Duffy has been trying to keep their relationship professional, but the danger surrounding them has only made the attraction between them stronger. Eventually, they stop fighting it. The two give in to the feelings that have been building between them. Somewhere out there, Roscoe and Dixon would probably have plenty to say about that. The following day, Richter and Duffy track down Doreen and force him to take them to his gallery. Once inside, Richter lays out the situation. Doreen has already committed 2 violent felonies. If he gets convicted of another one, he could be facing a mandatory life sentence. Doreen tries to argue his way out of it, but Duffy is ready. She opens her laptop and shows him footage of himself placing a disabled parking permit in his vehicle so he could illegally use a space reserved for disabled drivers. That is only the beginning. Richters then tells him they also know he threatened a doctor and forced him to falsify a diagnosis claiming Doreen suffered from severe arthritis in his knee. That threat gives them another serious charge. Suddenly, Doreen has very little room to negotiate. Richters offers him a choice. He can cooperate and pretend to arrange a weapons deal with Beck, or they can hand him over to the authorities and let the legal consequences catch up with him. Doreen realizes he has no real choice. He agrees to cooperate. But there is an irony to the situation. Richters and Duffy are manipulating Doreen in almost the same way Quinn manipulates everyone around him. The difference is that this time, the manipulation is being used to bring Quinn down. The next morning in Maine, Neagley joins the operation. She poses as a representative connected to Doreen and waits for Beck. When Beck arrives, Neagley immediately slips into character. She pretends to be there to discuss the fake weapons deal while carefully steering the conversation toward the information they actually need. From a distance, Richters, Duffy, and Villanueva monitor the exchange. Neagley tells Beck that Richters may be his only real chance of surviving this. If Beck wants to escape Quinn's control and protect Richters, he needs to trust Richters and provide information about the major weapons deal. Beck admits that he doesn't know much. He only knows the transaction is happening that day and that the buyers are flying in from Yemen on a private aircraft. Neagley pushes him harder. She tells Beck that if he wants to save himself and his son, he needs to discover the exact time and location of the transaction. Without that information, there is nothing they can do. To make the deception convincing, Neagley and Beck stage an argument over the price. They make it look as though the negotiations have completely fallen apart. Then they separate. But the important part has already been accomplished. Beck is now officially cooperating with Richters and the others. For the first time, they have someone inside Quinn's organization who can provide them with real information. But Quinn is still moving pieces of his own. At an undisclosed location, Quinn gets out of his vehicle and walks down into a cellar carrying food for Teresa. It looks almost like an act of kindness. It isn't. The food is simply another way to keep Teresa alive and under control. She isn't being protected. She's being kept alive for the buyers. Meanwhile, Neagley joins Richters, Duffy, and Villanueva for lunch as they go over the next phase of the plan. Duffy contacts her people at the FAA and asks them to track the private aircraft arriving from Yemen. If they can identify the buyers and follow their movements, they may finally be able to locate the weapons transaction before Quinn has a chance to move everything. Away from the others, Neagley and Richters discuss just how dangerous this operation has become. This isn't Margrave. And it isn't New York. Quinn is former military, highly experienced, ruthless, and surrounded by heavily armed men. And the weapons he controls aren't ordinary street guns. They're sophisticated, military-grade firearms. Neagley understands the danger. So does Richters. Their odds aren't exactly comforting. Back at Beck's house, Beck enters his room and finds Richters repairing the cap gun he bought for his father's birthday. For once, there is no tension between them. The moment is genuine. Beck finally lets his guard down and admits that he truly loves his son, even though he knows he has failed him. He apologizes for being a poor father, especially after Richard's mother died. Beck admits that he wasn't there for Richters when he needed him most. Richters then gives his father the repaired cap gun. The two embrace. For a brief moment, the fear and violence surrounding the house disappear. Then Duffy receives the information they've been waiting for. Her FAA contact has located the buyer's aircraft. Neagley picks up the trail and follows the group as they leave the airport and head toward an upscale inn and spa. At the same time, Beck meets Quinn in his office and tries to get more information about the upcoming transaction. Quinn doesn't give up details easily, but Beck keeps pressing. Eventually, Quinn reveals just enough. The weapons deal will take place at a salvage yard at 9 p.m. And the timing couldn't be more perfect. The transaction is scheduled to happen in the middle of Beck's birthday party. With Beck's house filled with guests, music, and birthday celebrations, Quinn has the perfect cover. He can move the weapons without attracting attention because everyone will assume the activity around the property is simply part of the party. Meanwhile, Neagley continues monitoring the buyers at the hotel. Richter receives a call from Beck confirming the time and location of the weapons deal. Beck is putting everything in Richter's hands now. He trusts Richter to stop Quinn and, more importantly, somehow get both him and Richard out alive. Richter immediately passes the information to Duffy and Villanueva. But the mood changes when Duffy suggests bringing in the ATF. From her perspective, they cannot take down an entire weapons smuggling operation by themselves, especially one controlled by a man as dangerous as Quinn. Richter refuses. For him, this isn't just an investigation anymore. It's personal. If the ATF takes control, Richter could lose his opportunity to confront Quinn and make him pay for what he did to Dominique Cole. Duffy understands why Richter feels that way, but she also sees the bigger danger. The argument becomes heated. Eventually, Richter storms away, casually claiming he's going to get coffee. Duffy and Villanueva are left with an impossible decision. Whether Richter agrees or not, they need federal backup. So they take the case to the ATF. The meeting goes badly almost immediately. Duffy is furious because the ATF wants to push her team aside after everything they've done to build the case. The ATF is equally angry. From their perspective, Duffy has brought them in at the last possible moment, with a major weapons transaction scheduled for that very night. After a tense argument, both sides finally reach a compromise. The ATF will lead the operation at the salvage yard and handle the investigation afterward. Duffy's team will not participate directly. They're ordered to remain inside the ATF surveillance vehicle and observe. Richter is obviously not going to accept those orders. But Duffy and Villanueva have little choice. As night falls, Beck continues preparing for his birthday party. For a brief moment, he helps Richard straighten his bow tie. It's a quiet father and son moment, almost as if they're trying to hold on to some sense of normality before everything falls apart. But the moment doesn't last. Quinn suddenly enters and orders Beck to leave for the salvage yard. Outside the salvage yard, ATF agents take up their positions and wait for the weapons transaction to begin. Inside the surveillance van, Duffy and Villanueva watch the area carefully. Then Duffy spots something unexpected. Richter walks toward her car. He opens the trunk and pulls out a sniper rifle. Duffy immediately realizes what happened. Richter didn't really leave earlier to get coffee. He went to get a rifle. Duffy follows him outside, intending to stop him. But the moment she sees the expression on Richter's face, she knows it's pointless. He's already made his decision. She reluctantly returns to the van, realizing there is no way to talk him out of it. Soon, a convoy of bizarre trucks and two black vehicles enters the salvage yard. Richter takes up a position with the rifle and calls Neagley. He tells her that once everything is over, she needs to erase every connection between them. Whatever happens next could make Richter look like the government's worst enemy. Then something doesn't feel right. Richter tells Neagley that the buyers have arrived. But Neagley immediately corrects him. She's been following the actual buyers ever since they left the hotel. The people arriving at the salvage yard aren't the buyers. Richter understands immediately. They've been set up. The salvage yard isn't the real transaction site. It's a trap. The real buyers are heading toward Beck's house, and Neagley is the only person still tracking them. Richter tells her to keep following the real buyers while he figures out how to recover from the situation. There isn't time for a detailed explanation. He trusts Neagley to understand what is happening and keep moving. At the salvage yard, Beck steps out of his vehicle and quickly realizes the same thing. The buyers aren't there. He has been set up too. Then everything erupts. Richter opens fire from his position, taking out Quinn's men one by one. Within seconds, the salvage yard becomes a full-scale firefight between Quinn's gunmen and the ATF. Duffy and Villanueva can no longer sit back and watch. They grab bulletproof vests and rush into the firefight, ignoring the order to stay inside the surveillance van. Bullets rip through the salvage yard. Men fall. The fake weapons meeting completely collapses into chaos. Once the worst of the shooting is over and most of Quinn's men are dead, Richter regroups with Duffy and Villanueva. In the middle of the chaos, they also manage to get Beck out alive. Beck confirms what Richter already suspected. He was fooled too. He had no idea that the real weapons deal was taking place back at his own house during the birthday party. Then Beck reveals the detail that changes everything. Teresa is at the house. She's heavily drugged and locked inside an upstairs room. Richter immediately grabs one of Quinn's surviving men and forces him to send a message claiming that everything is under control and that they are heading back to the party. Quinn, still unaware that his trap at the salvage yard has failed, continues moving through the birthday celebration as though he is completely in control. Richter then calls Neagley, who is hiding in the bushes outside Beck's property and keeping watch on the house and the real buyers. He tells her that the situation at the salvage yard is over. Everyone is dead except Richter, Duffy, Villanueva, Beck, and one surviving member of Quinn's crew. Because the weapons are still supposed to be delivered to Beck's residence, the trucks need to be brought back to the property. Neagley confirms that the guests have already arrived. The transaction hasn't happened yet, and the buyers are still inside the mansion. Then she raises the obvious problem. Paulie. He's still guarding the estate, looking less like a security guard and more like a human attack dog. Neagley asks what they're going to do about him. Richter gives her a simple answer. Paulie is his problem. Richter forces Quinn's surviving man to drive one of the trucks. On the way, they pick up Neagley. Villanueva follows behind in the second truck, doing his best to get it onto the property without making the whole situation look suspicious. Inside the mansion, Quinn welcomes Nasser, the buyer, and gives him the key to Teresa's room. It's now obvious that Teresa is part of the transaction. She's being offered as a twisted bonus to compensate the buyers for the delays and keep them satisfied. The trucks finally arrive at the estate. But they're not positioned the way they should be. Paulie immediately notices. He approaches the vehicles to investigate, giving Richter the opening he needs. Richter kills the driver and stays behind to deal with Paulie while the others follow Beck through a shortcut into the house. And then the fight everyone has been waiting for finally begins. Richter versus Paulie. From the moment they first met, there has been an obvious tension between them. Now it explodes into a brutal physical confrontation. Neither man gives an inch. They're both enormous, powerful, and determined to put the other one down. Inside the house, everyone has a different job. Neagley disguises herself as a waiter and blends into the birthday party, moving through the guests while searching for Quinn. Villanueva focuses on getting Richard to safety. Duffy heads deeper into the mansion to find Teresa. Beck gives Duffy a skeleton key that can unlock every door in the house. Meanwhile, Neagley continues searching the party for Quinn, waiting for the right moment to make her move. Outside, Richter and Paulie crash into the carriage house. They trade vicious blows, smashing into walls and furniture as the fight becomes increasingly violent. Eventually, Paulie gains the upper hand. He gets Reacher into a chokehold and begins strangling him. For a moment, it looks like Reacher may finally be overpowered. But Reacher fights dirty when he has to. He drives his fingers into Polly's eye, forcing him to let go. The struggle sends them crashing into a wooden support. The structure gives way. Suddenly, hundreds of pounds of fertilizer come crashing down on both men, burying them beneath the debris. Inside the house, Villanueva searches for Richard. But he runs into one of the waiters. The man doesn't look dangerous at first. That changes quickly. Villanueva corners him in the bathroom, but the supposed waiter fights back. A brutal struggle breaks out, forcing Villanueva to handle the threat himself. Back in the carriage house, Polly manages to claw his way out of the fertilizer first. He finds Reacher and wraps a chain around his neck. Then he hoists him into the air, hanging him from the wooden ceiling. Polly walks away, convinced that Reacher is finished. But Reacher refuses to die. Fighting through the pain and lack of oxygen, he forces himself to move. With the last of his strength, he tears the pulley loose from the ceiling and crashes back to the ground. He's badly injured, but he's still alive. And he's still fighting. Richard hears the commotion coming from the bathroom and rushes in. There, he finds Villanueva battered, bloody, but still standing. It isn't pretty, but Villanueva has won. Outside, Reacher and Polly collide once again. Both men are exhausted. Neither is willing to stop. Their fight spills toward the water, near the same area where Harley previously dumped the bodies. Even once they're in the ocean, neither man gives up. They continue fighting, each determined to make sure the other one doesn't walk away alive. The current drags both men underwater and pulls them farther away from the shore. Reacher fights against the water and manages to land one final, devastating punch directly to Polly's throat. Polly freezes. Stunned and unable to recover, he slips beneath the surface and disappears into the darkness. Reacher struggles his way back to shore. Meanwhile, Duffy continues searching for Teresa. Neagley is still trying to locate Quinn when a waiter notices that she is acting suspiciously. She quickly talks her way out of the situation. But when she returns to the place where Quinn was standing, he is gone. Quinn has figured out that something is wrong. The federal agents are closing in. His operation has been exposed. And now the weapons deal has to happen immediately. As Reacher approaches the house, Polly somehow appears one more time. He's battered, barely standing, and somehow still determined to finish the fight. Reacher leads him toward the guardhouse, where he quietly removes a bullet from the chamber of Polly's automatic weapon. Polly grabs the gun, believing he finally has Reacher at his mercy. He pulls the trigger. But instead of firing normally, the damaged weapon backfires. The resulting blast sends shrapnel into Polly's throat. This time, Polly doesn't get back up. He is finally dead. Elsewhere, Duffy reaches Teresa's room. She hides inside and waits. When Nasser enters, Duffy catches him at gunpoint. At the same time, Reacher storms into the barn where Quinn's weapons are being stored. He grabs a shotgun and starts tearing through Quinn's men, dropping them one after another. The gunfire echoes throughout the property. Everyone knows something has gone terribly wrong. For Duffy, the chaos creates the perfect opportunity. She takes down Nasser and his bodyguard, then gets Teresa moving before anyone can stop them. Reacher is completely unleashed now. He moves through the weapons barn, taking down Quinn's men with ruthless efficiency. The panic spreads from the barn into the birthday party. Quinn finally realizes that the entire operation is collapsing. Desperate and cornered, he opens fire on the client's men. The guests panic and scatter. Duffy uses the confusion to get Teresa out safely. Meanwhile, Neagley keeps Quinn occupied in a firefight. Villanueva tries to guide Richard toward another exit, but Quinn intercepts them and drags Richard into the office. Then Beck rushes in. He raises Richard's cap gun toward Quinn. For one brief moment, Beck looks ready to finally stand up to the man who has controlled and destroyed his life. But there is a problem. The epoxy holding the toy gun together hasn't dried properly. The barrel begins to fall apart. Quinn immediately realizes the weapon is fake. He raises his real gun and opens fire. Beck is killed in front of Richard. But while Quinn is focused on Beck, Richard grabs an Uzi and sprays the room with bullets. Quinn is forced to retreat. He runs for the exit. But Reacher is already coming for him. Just as Quinn reaches the outside, Tereov and his men arrive and surround him. Reacher tells Tereov that he has unfinished business with Quinn. Tereov makes his position clear. He doesn't care about Reacher's personal revenge. But then Reacher's allies step forward, leveling the situation. Neagley appears carrying the money taken from Nasser's men. She offers Tereov a simple deal. Take the money and walk away. Leave Quinn behind. The Russians accept. Money is more important than loyalty, especially when Quinn has already caused them enough problems. Tereov and his men leave. Quinn is finally alone. Now it's just Reacher and Quinn. Exactly how Reacher wanted it. At first, Quinn still doesn't recognize the man standing in front of him. Then Reacher says one name. Dominique. The name triggers something. Quinn's memories begin returning. He finally understands who Reacher is and why he has spent all this time hunting him. Reacher doesn't waste the moment. With a cold smile, he raises his gun and pulls the trigger. This time, there is no mistake. The bullet ends Quinn's life for good. The next morning, police arrive to deal with the aftermath of the bloodshed. Quinn's operation is finished. Teresa is alive. And Beck's house is finally no longer a prison. Before Reacher leaves, he gives Richard the one thing he has wanted all along. Freedom. Richard drives away from his father's estate with a bag of money beside him and a genuine chance to build a new life on his own terms. In the aftermath, Duffy's career with the DEA comes to an end. She loses her job, but she doesn't appear broken by it. After everything she's been through, she seems ready to move forward. After everything that happened, Duffy's story comes to an end as well. Her career with the DA is over, and in some ways, she seems ready to walk away from more than just the agency. Whatever connection she had with Reacher has run its course. Their relationship was never meant to last, and now that the case is finished, there is nothing left keeping them together. Still, Duffy can walk away knowing they accomplished what they set out to do. Villanueva reaches a similar conclusion. After everything he has survived, he decides it is finally time to stop chasing dangerous criminals and start focusing on the life waiting for him at home. Retirement no longer feels like giving up. Instead, it feels like something he has earned, especially with his wife still there waiting for him. Duffy's final responsibility is getting Teresa home safely. She takes her back to her grandmother, finally returning her to the one place where she can feel safe. Teresa has spent far too long being manipulated, drugged, imprisoned, and treated like a bargaining chip in Quinn's operation. Now she is finally free. For Duffy, seeing Teresa reunited with her grandmother means more than any promotion or government badge ever could. And then there is Reacher. With Quinn dead, Richard free, Teresa safe, and the entire operation destroyed, there is nothing left for him to do. As always, once the dust settles, Reacher moves on. Before leaving town, he discovers a beautiful motorcycle sitting inside Beck's garage. Naturally, Reacher decides it is exactly what he needs. There is no dramatic farewell and no emotional speech. He simply gets on the bike, starts the engine, and rides away. Just like that, Jack Reacher disappears down the road and heads toward whatever comes next. Final thoughts on Season 3. The biggest thing I would say about Reacher Season 3 is that the show seems to remember what made people fall in love with it in the first place. Season 2 was not terrible by any means. It still had plenty of brutal fights, sharp one-liners, and Alan Ritchson walking into rooms like a human wrecking ball. But something felt different. The story became bigger, the team dynamic became more important, and at times Reacher himself felt like only one piece of a much larger machine. Season 3 corrects much of that. This time, the story puts Reacher back at the center. He is dropped into a dangerous criminal operation, forced to work undercover, and surrounded by people who cannot be trusted. Slowly, he starts figuring out what is really happening and dismantling the operation from the inside. That is where the character works best. Reacher is at his strongest when he walks into a complicated situation, studies everyone around him, notices the details nobody else sees, and then starts taking the entire problem apart piece by piece. The show does not need to make everything bigger and more complicated to be entertaining. Sometimes, all it needs is Reacher in the middle of a dangerous situation, using his brain, his instincts, and, when necessary, his fists. That is why Season 3 feels like something of a return to form. It brings back the undercover atmosphere, dangerous criminals, mysterious motives, escalating tension, and physical confrontations that made the series so entertaining in the first place. Most importantly, Reacher once again feels like the engine driving the story rather than simply another member of an ensemble. That does not mean the season is perfect. There are moments where the story feels stretched, and there are scenes where the writing explains things more than necessary. But the core formula works. The confidence is back, the action is back, and that feeling that Reacher is somehow the smartest person in the room while also being the last person anyone should ever try to fight is back too. And honestly, that is enough to make Season 3 feel like a major improvement. It is difficult to discuss Season 3 without comparing it to the first two seasons. Season 1 set a surprisingly high standard. Many people probably expected nothing more than a straightforward action series. Instead, the show delivered a compelling mystery, memorable characters, and a version of Jack Reacher who relied just as much on observation and deduction as he did on physical strength. It felt fresh. It felt confident. And most importantly, it knew exactly what kind of show it wanted to be. Then Season 2 arrived, and the reaction became much more divided. Some viewers still enjoyed it, while others felt the series had moved away from what made the first season so effective. The scale became larger, the team became more important, and the balance between the characters changed. It was not necessarily a bad season. It simply did not leave the same impression. That is what makes Season 3 interesting. Instead of trying to reinvent the series again or constantly raise the stakes, it feels like the show took a step back and asked a much simpler question. What made Reacher work in the first place? Rather than chasing bigger action sequences or constantly expanding the world, Season 3 leans back into the elements that made the characters so entertaining. Reacher investigates, observes, infiltrates, manipulates his enemies, and eventually turns the entire situation against them. Of course, not everyone will agree on where Season 3 ranks. Honestly, all of those opinions are understandable. But if what you wanted from Reacher was a season where Reacher once again feels like the main attraction, Season 3 delivers exactly that. He is the mystery. He is the muscle. He is the detective. And, ultimately, he is the story. Season 1 still has an advantage because everything about it felt fresh. We were meeting Reacher for the first time, learning how he thinks, how he investigates, and how he approaches problems in ways that separate him from the typical action hero. That first impression is extremely difficult for any later season to recreate. Season 2 expanded the world and introduced a larger team dynamic, but that also changed the rhythm of the series. For some viewers, that evolution worked. For others, it took away some of the simplicity that made the first season so effective. Season 3 lands somewhere between those two approaches. It does not completely recreate the magic of Season 1, but it also avoids many of the choices that made Season 2 more divisive. Instead, it finds a middle ground. The show feels familiar without simply repeating what came before. And that may be its biggest strength. The writers seem to understand that audiences were not asking for a completely different version of Reacher. They simply wanted the character they originally connected with. For the most part, Season 3 delivers exactly that. One major reason the season feels more focused is the story it chooses to adapt. This time, the series takes on Persuader, and the material naturally fits the strengths of this version of Reacher. You do not need to have read every book in the series to notice the difference. The season establishes its direction fairly quickly. Instead of jumping between too many unrelated storylines, it centers on one main mission and allows the other elements to develop around it. That gives the story a stronger sense of purpose and keeps the momentum moving without constantly shifting gears. For longtime fans of the novels, there is another reason to appreciate the season. The adaptation stays relatively close to the spirit of the original book. Obviously, a television adaptation has to make changes. Certain characters, situations, and story elements have to be adjusted for the screen. But the series never feels as though it has abandoned the source material simply to create bigger action sequences. The central ideas remain recognizable. The basic setup remains intact. And the overall journey still feels like Persuader. That consistency helps the season tremendously. Rather than trying to completely reinvent Reacher, the writers seem comfortable trusting the story they are adapting. They allow the mystery to unfold naturally, giving the investigation, undercover operation, and personal stakes enough room to develop without constantly competing with one another. More importantly, the story plays directly into Reacher's strengths. He is placed in unfamiliar territory, surrounded by people who do not completely trust him, and forced to figure out what is really happening one piece at a time. That is a much better fit for the character than simply throwing him into non-stop action from the first episode. What makes the season particularly effective is that it does not depend on constant twists to keep you interested. A lot of the entertainment comes from watching Reacher navigate an increasingly dangerous situation while quietly putting the pieces together. Even when the action slows down, there is usually another clue to uncover, another conversation that carries more meaning than it initially appears to, or another decision that pushes him deeper into enemy territory. That balance is one of the strongest aspects of the season. It allows Reacher to be an investigator without forgetting that this is still an action thriller. The show understands that Reacher is not simply a giant guy who walks into a room and starts punching people. He observes. He analyzes. He notices details other people overlook. And when the situation finally demands violence, he is more than capable of delivering it. Whether you have read the novels or not, Season 3 feels like a story that understands who Jack Reacher is. Instead of reshaping the character to fit whatever plot the writers want to tell, the season chooses a story that naturally allows Reacher to do what he does best. That makes the entire season feel more confident. And that confidence becomes even more obvious once the undercover operation begins. Season 3 wastes very little time putting Reacher into a situation that is completely different from his usual approach. Normally, he can walk into a town, identify the people causing trouble, investigate them, and eventually take them apart one by one. This time, he cannot do that. To reach the enemy, Reacher has to become part of their world. That immediately changes the atmosphere of the entire season. Every conversation carries a risk. Every unfamiliar face could potentially expose him. Every decision has consequences. And once his cover is blown, there may not be any easy way out. That is what makes the undercover storyline so effective. Reacher is no longer simply hunting the criminals from the outside. He is standing directly inside their operation, surrounded by people who would kill him if they discovered the truth. For someone like Richter, who normally operates according to his own rules, that creates a completely different kind of tension. He cannot simply solve every problem with his fists. He has to think ahead. He has to lie convincingly. He has to know when to speak and when to stay silent. Most importantly, he has to make his enemies believe that he belongs among them. And that is where Season 3 feels especially strong. Instead of making Richter less capable to create suspense, the story creates situations where even someone as observant and dangerous as him has to be careful. Because this time, getting caught does not just mean losing a fight. It could mean losing everything. What's interesting about this setup is that it does not suddenly transform Richter into some flawless master of espionage. If anything, the season makes it clear that deception is not exactly his greatest strength. Richter is naturally blunt. He is direct, brutally honest, and usually prefers dealing with problems by confronting them head-on. Living behind a false identity does not come naturally to someone like him. That is where Season 3 gets much of its tension. For perhaps the first time, Richter is forced to constantly hold himself back. He cannot simply say what he is thinking. He cannot always react the way he normally would. And he cannot afford to solve every problem with his fists. That creates a completely different kind of suspense. You are not only wondering who is behind the larger conspiracy. You are also constantly asking whether the people around Richter are beginning to notice that something about him does not quite add up. Sometimes it is nothing more than a suspicious glance. Other times, it is an awkward conversation that lasts just a few seconds longer than it should. Those little moments might seem insignificant on their own, but together they create a steady feeling of pressure that runs through the entire season. The undercover mission also gives the story a much stronger sense of progression. Richter is not simply jumping from one fight to another. He is slowly earning people's trust, collecting information, learning how the operation works, and pushing himself deeper into a criminal organization that becomes more dangerous with every step. And the deeper he goes, the harder it becomes to get back out. One of the things I liked most is that the investigation never feels disconnected from the action. The mystery keeps driving the story forward, but the possibility of violence is always sitting just beneath the surface. A quiet conversation can suddenly become a fight. A simple meeting can turn into a life-or-death situation. One wrong move could expose Richter and destroy everything he has been building. That unpredictability keeps the tension alive. It also allows the character to show a different side of himself. Yes, Richter is still the enormous, intimidating man who can end a fight in seconds. But this time, physical strength is only one part of his arsenal. He has to rely just as heavily on patience, observation, timing, and his ability to read the people around him. And honestly, watching Richter carefully navigate a room full of dangerous criminals can be just as satisfying as watching him tear through that same room a few minutes later. That balance gives Season 3 a different rhythm. The undercover premise is not simply another plot device thrown into the story. It becomes the foundation for almost everything that follows. It makes the season more focused, more suspenseful, and more engaging than it would have been if the show had relied entirely on non-stop action. Once Richter enters Zachary Beck's world, the story becomes much more contained. And that works in its favor. Instead of sending the plot in a dozen different directions, the season builds everything around one dangerous environment where almost everyone appears to be hiding something. At first glance, Beck's operation does not look like the kind of criminal empire you would expect from a major action thriller. There are no flashy headquarters or cartoonishly evil villains everywhere you look. On the surface, everything seems almost respectable. And that is precisely what makes it interesting. The deeper Richter gets into Beck's world, the more obvious it becomes that something much darker is happening behind closed doors. Nobody seems willing to tell the complete truth. Everyone has something to hide. And Reacher has to figure out who is lying, who can be trusted, and who is simply waiting for the right opportunity to turn on him. That uncertainty becomes the engine of the story. Every new conversation feels like another piece of a much larger puzzle. Every person Reacher encounters could become an important source of information or another obstacle standing between him and the truth. The show also does a good job of not revealing everything too quickly. Instead of explaining the entire conspiracy up front, it gradually removes one layer at a time. Reacher discovers something, follows the lead, uncovers another secret, and realizes that the situation is even bigger than he initially thought. That slow progression allows the tension to build naturally. It also keeps the audience guessing. There are moments when a character seems trustworthy, only for new information to completely change the way you see them. Then there are other characters who appear dangerous from the beginning but eventually turn out to have a much more complicated role in the overall story. That constant uncertainty makes the investigation much more enjoyable because, for a large portion of the season, neither Reacher nor the audience has the complete picture. The setting helps with that atmosphere as well. Whether Reacher is moving through heavily guarded properties, isolated locations, suspicious warehouses, or tense meetings where nobody fully trusts anyone else, there is always the feeling that he is operating on enemy territory. One wrong decision could expose him. One careless conversation could destroy his cover. And one mistake could put everyone around him in danger. That pressure never completely disappears, which gives even the quieter scenes a sense of danger. And that is probably what I appreciated most about Beck's Criminal World. The show does not need to fill every minute with explosions and gunfights to make the operation feel dangerous. Sometimes, a room full of people sitting quietly around a table can be more intimidating than an entire army of armed men. Because when Reacher is surrounded by people who might be watching him, testing him, or waiting for him to slip up, you know that the real danger is not always going to come from a gun. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon in the room is simply being caught telling the wrong lie. Instead, the season is built around suspicion. Reacher is not simply fighting his way through one enemy after another. He is trying to understand how all the pieces connect, who is actually pulling the strings, and which relationships are based on genuine loyalty and which ones are held together by fear. As the story moves forward, Beck's world becomes more complicated without ever becoming difficult to follow. New pieces fall into place, hidden connections begin to emerge, and what initially looks like a relatively straightforward criminal operation slowly reveals itself to be something much bigger. By keeping the story centered on Beck's organization, Season 3 avoids feeling scattered. There is one central operation, one major conspiracy, and one dangerous environment that Reacher has to survive from the inside. That focus gives the season a tighter and more controlled feel, allowing the investigation to be just as interesting as the action. Reacher is finally back at the center. One of the smartest decisions Season 3 makes is putting Jack Reacher exactly where he belongs, at the center of the story. That might sound obvious. After all, he is the title character. But there is a big difference between a show that simply features Reacher and one that is actually driven by him. Season 3 understands that difference. Almost everything that happens is set in motion by Reacher's decisions. He is not simply reacting to events around him. He is pushing the investigation forward, making difficult choices, taking risks, and forcing everyone around him to adapt. Whether he is gathering information, confronting dangerous criminals, manipulating his enemies, or quietly piecing together the larger mystery, the momentum always comes back to him. That makes the entire season feel much more focused. There are still plenty of supporting characters, but they never completely overshadow Reacher. They help him, challenge him, complicate his mission, or create new problems for him to solve. But the spotlight never stays away from the main character for too long. Every relationship ultimately serves Reacher's journey rather than competing with it. And that brings back one of the biggest reasons the character became so popular in the first place. Reacher works best as a lone problem solver. He walks into unfamiliar territory, studies the situation, figures out what is really happening, and then slowly starts shifting the balance of power in his favor. There is something incredibly satisfying about watching one man dismantle an entire criminal operation simply because he is smarter, tougher, and more determined than the people standing against him. Season 3 leans heavily into that formula without making it feel repetitive. Instead of surrounding Reacher with a team of equally capable characters who can solve every problem alongside him, the story allows him to carry most of the weight himself. The supporting characters still matter, but they never completely take over the investigation or steal the moments that are supposed to belong to Reacher. That keeps the focus exactly where it needs to be. Another thing that works particularly well is how unpredictable Reacher remains. You rarely know exactly how he is going to handle a situation. Sometimes he talks his way through a problem. Sometimes he waits patiently for the perfect opportunity. And sometimes, after deciding that talking is no longer useful, he ends the conversation with one punch. That unpredictability gives even ordinary scenes an extra layer of tension because you always feel like Reacher is several steps ahead of everyone else. More importantly, the season trusts the character. It does not constantly stop to explain why Reacher is intelligent, capable, or dangerous. Instead, it lets him demonstrate those qualities through his actions. Whether he is reading someone's body language, solving a complicated problem, or walking into a seemingly impossible situation without showing the slightest bit of fear, the character speaks for himself. That is much more effective than giving him long speeches about how dangerous he is. By bringing the focus back to one man dealing with one dangerous mission, Season 3 recaptures a huge part of what made the series so entertaining. Everything feels tighter. Everything feels more deliberate. And, most importantly, everything feels more personal because Reacher is once again at the center of the major decisions driving the story. Alan Ritchson as Reacher. If there is one thing that almost everyone seems to agree on, it is that Alan Ritchson was practically made to play Jack Reacher. By the time Season 3 arrives, it no longer feels like you are watching an actor trying to become the character. He simply feels like Reacher. The confidence, the calmness, the intimidating presence, and the way he carries himself all feel completely natural. You never have to wonder whether he belongs in the role because every scene reinforces the idea that he does. And, of course, the physical side of the character is impossible to ignore. Reacher has always been described as an enormous man, and Ritchson brings that description to life in a way that immediately changes the atmosphere whenever he enters a room. He does not need to threaten anyone. He does not need to raise his voice. Sometimes, he does not even need to say anything. His presence alone is enough. The camera does not have to convince you that people would be intimidated by him. You can see it in the way other characters react whenever he walks into a room. But what makes Ritchson's performance work is that his size never feels like a cheap gimmick. Reacher's physicality is not there simply to make him look impressive. It is an important part of how the character operates. He knows exactly how dangerous he is, but he rarely needs to prove it. And that restraint makes the moments when he finally decides to use that strength even more satisfying. That challenge is making Reacher feel powerful without making him feel invincible. Season 3 mostly finds the right balance. He can walk into situations that would terrify almost anyone else, but he still gets hurt, outnumbered, surprised, and pushed to his limits. The fight with Polly is a good example. Reacher's size and skill give him an advantage, but the battle is exhausting and dangerous enough that you genuinely wonder whether he will make it out. That matters because the character is more interesting when his strength has consequences. If every confrontation were effortless, the action would quickly become predictable. Instead, the season occasionally lets Reacher struggle, forcing him to improvise rather than simply overpower everyone in his path. And that connects to another strength of Alan Ritchson's performance. Reacher doesn't need to announce that he's dangerous. The character rarely threatens people with elaborate speeches. His calmness does most of the work. When Reacher becomes quiet, you often know something is about to happen. The season also understands that Reacher's intelligence is just as important as his physical ability. He spends much of the story watching people, testing their reactions, remembering details, and figuring out connections that everyone else misses. The undercover setup gives him more opportunities to demonstrate that side of the character than the previous season did. That combination is really the ideal Reacher formula. The size makes people underestimate how intelligent he is, the intelligence allows him to understand situations before everyone else, the patience lets him wait for the right moment, the violence comes when patience is no longer useful, the dry humor keeps him from becoming completely humorless, the moral code gives all that violence a clear purpose. And that's probably why Season 3 feels more like the Reacher people wanted after Season 1. It doesn't need to constantly prove that he's the strongest person in the room. It simply puts him in rooms where being strong, smart, observant, and absolutely unwilling to back down all matter. The biggest compliment you can give the season is that Reacher feels like Reacher again. Not because every episode copies Season 1, but because the show understands what makes the character work. He is an outsider. He doesn't want possessions or status. He doesn't need to be in charge, yet somehow ends up taking control whenever the situation demands it. And once he decides that someone has crossed a line, stopping him becomes almost impossible. By the finale, that identity is completely restored. Reacher has destroyed Quinn's operation, saved Teresa, helped Richard escape his father's criminal world, and settled the unfinished business surrounding Dominique Cole. Then, rather than staying around to collect praise or enjoy the victory, he simply leaves. That's arguably the most Reacher ending possible. He gets on the motorcycle, heads down the road, and disappears. No ceremony. No promotion. No permanent home. No promise that he'll come back. Just Reacher moving toward whatever problem happens to be waiting for him next. And honestly, that's where the season leaves the character in the best possible place. Season 3 doesn't reinvent Reacher. It remembers why people liked him. It gives him a mystery worth solving, an enemy worth hunting, enough physical danger to make the action satisfying, and enough investigation to remind us that his brain is every bit as important as his fists. Season may first still have the advantage of being the first time we experienced all of that. But Season 3 feels like the series has finally figured out how to capture the same identity without simply repeating the original formula. For me, that's why it works.